After a deadly tornado outbreak tore through the Midwest, at least 21 confirmed dead in Kentucky and Missouri. We will bring you the developing details all morning long. Right now, former FBI Director James Comey in the hot seat, questioned by the Secret Service over his 8647 Instagram post, where this investigation could be heading and how President Trump is responding. And that Wisconsin judge accused of helping an illegal migrant evade ICE is set to face a judge with a history of criticizing President Trump, what it could mean for her upcoming trial. Plus, new surveillance video of that New Orleans jailbreak as 7 armed and dangerous escapees still remain at large. And how an alleged leak to the media in the Idaho student murders case could impact suspect Bryan Kohberger's August trial. Welcome, everyone, to Fox News Live. I am Molly Line. We begin with Madeline Rivera at the White House with more on this investigation into James Comey. Madeline, to you.
Good morning, Molly. Former FBI Director James Comey says he wasn't calling for violence against the president with this Instagram post, saying he doesn't even know what the numbers 8647 mean. But President Trump is not buying that argument.
He knew exactly what that meant. A child knows what that meant. If you're the FBI director and you don't know what that meant assassination.
Fox is told Comey's interview with Secret Service on Friday lasted about 70 minutes. The Secret Service will interview his wife next. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem posted about the interview on X, saying she will continue to take all measures necessary to ensure the protection of President Trump. At this point, Secret Service is leading the investigation, but the FBI and the Justice Department overall can take a bigger role if necessary. Comey says he was walking on the beach when he saw these shells arranged to form the numbers 8647. 86 can be used as slang for remove, and 47 in this case was seen as referring to Trump, the 47th president. Comey says he did not realize the numbers were associated with violence and took down the post. On the international front, the president is back from the Middle East, where he says he was able to land billions of dollars of deals for the U.S. He anticipates the U.S. is also close to striking a new nuclear agreement with Iran after the U.S. handed a proposal.
Well, we're going to have a solution one way or the other. It's either going to be violent or not violent. And I far prefer nonviolent.
But the president is facing a couple of domestic challenges. The Supreme Court is extending a block on deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. The president's big, beautiful bill also hit a roadblock on Friday after the House Budget Committee failed to advance it out of the panel. The panel is holding another vote on the bill tomorrow night. Molly, back to you.
Madeline Rivera, thank you for leading us off this morning from the White House. This as hundreds of state and local law enforcement across the country are signing agreements with ICE to help that agency find illegal aliens with deportation orders and criminal histories. CB Cotton has the details on this. CB, good morning.
Hey, Molly. Yeah, Suburban County right outside of Philly now has finalized its agreement with ICE, making Bucks County one of the latest in a growing list of other state and local law enforcement agencies who are signing ICE 287G task force model agreements, which allow collaboration with ICE on immigration enforcement. But get this, before any work's been done, there's already growing pushback. Bucks County Sheriff Fred Herron defended his decision to Fox News, saying the agreement will allow about a dozen of his deputies to receive specialized training from ICE on how to use a federal immigration database. Herron says his deputies will only use the database to check the legal status of people Bucks County is holding on existing criminal charges or those who are brought into custody on outstanding warrants.
You get a criminal off the street today, that means tomorrow it's a guarantee. It's not a maybe. It's a 100% guarantee. Tomorrow there'll be one less victim in Bucks County. And that is what it's all about, preventing crime.
So the 287G task force model program has been gaining steam as the Trump administration tries to carry out its goal of mass deportations. You may remember Operation Tidal Wave in Florida last month was a result of the program. Several state agencies there helped ICE agents sweep through communities to find illegal migrants with deportation orders or others with criminal histories. More than 1,100 people were taken into custody in a single week. But how the partnership with the feds is carried out will look different for each community. Bucks County Sheriff Fred Herron has insisted his officers will only be trained on paperwork and database access, but it hasn't stopped some community members from voicing their disapproval.
I strongly oppose the Sheriff's Office applying for any formal partnership with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
No one's above the law, and you can't have the person pushing this policy into Bucks County or any county in America who's entirely lawless.
So Pennsylvania's chapter of the ACLU is reportedly planning to sue, arguing the sheriff didn't have the sole authority to enter into this agreement with ICE. DHS has told Fox in part that the 287G program is a best-in-class program to keep officers, communities, and ICE agents safe while getting, quote, the worst of the worst out of the country. Molly.
All right, CB Cotton, thank you. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, Judge Lynn Alderman, who released a law review article in 2020 criticizing President Trump, is now set to oversee the trial for Wisconsin Judge Hannah Duggan. Now, Duggan is accused of helping an illegal migrant evade immigration agents. She pleaded not guilty to those charges this week and is expected to stand trial in late July. Pretty quick timeline there. The read now from former federal prosecutor and former acting ICE director Jonathan Fahey. Thank you, sir, for a little bit of your time on this Saturday morning. Greatly appreciate it.
Good morning.
Let's start with this Duggan case. It's going to get before a judge, this particular judge, rather swiftly. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, it is concerning. Again, we have a situation with at least a seemingly politically biased judge starting off this case. But really the real issue here, the legal issue that's going to be addressed most quickly, is this judge has filed a motion to say her case should be dismissed because she has what she calls judicial immunity from being charged at all in this case. And they're piggybacking based on the Trump immunity decision. She's saying she, as part of her role as a judge, this was totally appropriate and she can't be prosecuted. So this motion, and it's been filed by a high-profile constitutional lawyer, is ultimately going to fail, whether it's not in front of this judge or in the appellate court, because they're essentially, if she were to succeed, it would say she can decide what ICE agents can, how they can enforce the law within her courtroom, and it's perfectly acceptable for her to sneak somebody out of the courtroom because she doesn't agree with ICE policy. So ultimately, she's going to lose the motion. But just so you know, we talked about this July 21st trial date. That trial date is not going to happen, and here's why. Because however this motion for immunity breaks down, either side will have an opportunity to appeal that before trial. It's one of the unique cases in criminal law where immunity can be appealed by both sides before trial. So I don't expect this case getting before a jury anytime soon. I ultimately expect she will lose the issue, and the facts, at least as I understand them, are quite compelling against her and her conduct. And it's quite surprising to me that anyone would support this, that she is shepherding out somebody that's on trial for a violent crime to hide them from ICE agents from deporting him. Is truly shocking behavior for a judge or anyone else.
You raised some great points there. She has a very expensive, high-profile legal team. She's making some interesting legal arguments. We shall see. But there's some other things I want to talk to you about. The Supreme Court this week also keeping its order in place to block the Trump administration from deporting migrants under the Alien Enemies Act. Now, this comes just days after a U.S. judge was the first to uphold the president's use of the act. So what happens next?
Well, this is kind of interesting because you've had these judges on both sides decide on the merits of the case. But what's interesting about the Supreme Court's decision, they haven't invalidated this act at all. And if you read the tea leaves, they're basically saying the act is okay, and they're signaling they're going to uphold the act in and of itself and the administration using this act to deport illegal aliens. Their issue really seems to breaks down to how the administration is applying it, the process, and how much notice people are getting to challenge the act when it's being applied to them. So I think ultimately the Supreme Court will get this on the merits and decide in the administration's favor and probably put in some procedures that must be followed for it to apply. But ultimately, I think it will break the president or President Trump's way on this. But it's sort of been a long road to get there. And what's really unfortunate about this is the Supreme Court says they have issues with the process, but they can't just say, okay, we'll follow this process and it's okay. It seems to be a convoluted way to get to a result. But ultimately, I think this isn't as big of a loss for the Trump administration as some are reporting. I think ultimately he'll be successful on this issue and being able to use this act to deport the most dangerous criminals.
Very interesting. One more thing. This also might seem a little convoluted to some, but Jonathan, also at the Supreme Court this week, there were the oral arguments on birthright citizenship. Now, two-pronged case. The justices weighing not only the president's order to end it, but also the ability of the district judges to block these federal policies. So the word injunctions was talked about a lot. Where do you think the justices will ultimately come down on this?
Well, there are two issues, and really what they were talking about mostly was these nationwide injunctions, which is where a court in a particular district makes a ruling and then essentially says the entire country has to be bound by the ruling, not just the litigants in front of that particular judge. I think the justices are going to have a major problem with the way these injunctions have been ferreted out by, particularly under the Trump administration, which I think were upwards around 40 have come down just during the Trump administration, which in effect allows one single judge in one district to dictate policy for the entire country and to dictate executive policy and also gum things up for a long period of time to prevent the executive branch from implementing their policy. So I think that the Supreme Court is going to have a major problem with that. On the issues of the birthright citizenship, it's a very interesting issue because this comes down to not whether or not somebody was born in the country or not, but whether or not they are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And as it's been applied, generally, people have been treated, if they're born here, they're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and have been citizens. The Trump administration's argument is quite good on this case, which is essentially the whole purpose of this was to deal with the freed slaves after the Civil War. If you were born here, you became a United States citizen. It had nothing to do with illegal aliens coming into the country. So at very least, Donald Trump has done a very good job of putting this issue in front of the American people, because it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for somebody to come here illegally and have their children become citizens and therefore almost get citizenship for themselves. It really seems like gaming the system. But ultimately, the issue is going to be, is somebody subject to the jurisdiction of the court? And it's not simply are they subject to the laws of the United States, but it's also a loyalty issue, because you could certainly see issues where you have dual citizenship, because somebody could be a citizen from, say, Mexico. They become a U.S. citizen and a Mexican citizen at the same time. And there's certainly conflicts could arise there. So it's not such a clear-cut case against the administration, but ultimately it's quite interesting, and the issue really needs to be discussed, and President Trump's brought that to the forefront.
And a lot of people following that one closely. Jonathan Fahey, thank you so very much for your insights today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are following some breaking news this morning. The Midwest again. This search for survivors continues right now in Kentucky as the death toll rises after a tornado tore through the southeast part of that state last night. The governor confirming at least 14 people are dead. There's also reports of severe injuries and just widespread damage. Meanwhile, in Missouri, we have at least 7 people that have lost their lives after severe weather ripped across the St. Louis area. We will continue to follow all of this and bring you updates as we get them. Oh, judge demanding answers after a suspected leak from Bryan Kohberger's pre-trial hearings. Those details next. And later, President Trump says he wants to meet with Vladimir Putin. Will that get the Russian and Ukrainian leaders any closer to striking a peace deal? Coming up. Folks in New Orleans on high alert as authorities are still searching for 7 inmates that are considered armed and dangerous who escaped from jail Friday morning. Caroline Elliott has the very latest as this hunt continues. Caroline, to you.
Molly, the focus is still tracking down those 7 inmates still on the run this morning. And the Orleans Parish Sheriff also pointing fingers at her own staff, now saying she believes this was an inside job. Surveillance video from inside the jail shows an inmate tugging on the door around midnight Friday. Then just 1 hour later, 10 inmates were seen on video breaking out of the jail. The group then climbed a fence using blankets to avoid being cut by barbed wire, and the last thing we see is video of the inmates sprinting across a busy interstate around 1:20 a.m. According to the sheriff's office, jail staff didn't even realize the 10 inmates were missing until they did a routine head count that next morning at 8:30 a.m. So how did 10 inmates bust out of jail? Well, investigators say this is the exit point, a hole behind a toilet. It appears the bolts were removed and the steel bars were also cut, which led the sheriff to believe this is an inside job.
At the time of the incident, there was no deputy physically on Pod 1 Delta, and the technician that was assigned to the housing unit module had actually stepped away to grab food.
So no one was watching live video all night at the jail?
I won't say no one was watching live video, but there are over 900 cameras.
Since the escape, the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office has captured 3 of the missing inmates so far, but 7 are still on the run. And those missing include suspects charged with murder and other violent crimes. The Louisiana Attorney General posted on X saying, quote, "Someone clearly dropped the ball and there's no excuse for this." She goes on to say, "My office will do whatever it takes to determine how this happened and make sure it won't happen again." And as the investigation continues to play out, 3 employees with the sheriff's office have been suspended. Molly.
Yeah, some changes coming down there, no doubt. Caroline Elliott, thank you very much. Now to Idaho, where the judge in the college student murders is demanding answers over an alleged leak. District Judge Stephen Hippler is asking for the names of anyone who may have had access to information on suspect Bryan Kohberger's internet search history and more details that were reported on a May 9th episode of Dateline. The judge's crackdown comes as Kohberger's team claims that they have evidence of an alternate suspect. Criminal defense attorney Mercedes Cohen on what this all means for the case. Good morning, Mercedes. I love to talk to you about this kind of thing. Why is the judge so upset here? And we need to also be conscious of the fact that prosecutors have talked about this being a potential death penalty case. So why is the judge so furious?
Molly, so wonderful to be on with you. I love unpackaging these complicated criminal cases with you. The reason why the judge is so focused on what he perceives to be prosecutorial, or maybe the defense, it wouldn't be the defense who is going to actually leak this to Dateline. So in all likelihood, it's someone, if anyone, it's going to be on the prosecution side. It's because it can deprive the defendant of a fair trial. And that's why the defense is up in an uproar. They've already said in open court that this type of disclosure is so devastating to the defense that they can't think, they truly believe, and they said this in open court, that it's insurmountable, that they're not going to be able to get a fair jury impaneled to actually oversee and make a decision on this case. And exactly to your point, the stakes are extraordinarily high in Kohberger because this is a death penalty case. And the prosecution has said repeatedly, they are not taking the death penalty off the table.
One of the other interesting things that has come up just very, very recently is that Kohberger's defense attorneys have hinted that they're going to introduce an alternate suspect. And the judge has said, I need answers on this theory, and I need them fast. Your thoughts on that?
You know, it's very interesting because when I first heard of it, and like, listen, he has a brilliant defense. He does. I mean, defense in terms of defense attorneys that are working very hard to keep Kohberger alive. That's going to be their main focus. The reason why they're introducing it, and the judge is a little suspect of it, is because they want to, not that it's not inappropriate, but they want the prospective jurors to hear that there may be others involved who had nothing to do with Kohberger. There might be these alternate killers out there. We haven't found those killers, but at least introduce that into the ecosystem of the prospective jurors. The judge isn't buying it. The judge is very particular. This is actually a very seasoned, excellent judge. He wants to see the actual proof. You want to introduce this very significant defense. Where's your proof? You can't just put it in the ecosystem and let these prospective jurors hear that there might be this killer out there loose or killers out there loose. And here you have an innocent man charged with the killing of these 4 students. So it was a good play by the defense, but now they're going to have to actually demonstrate that they've done it in good faith and they actually have proof that there may be this unknown killer or unknown killers out there.
Yeah, Mercedes, I'm covering a case right now up in Massachusetts where the third-party culprit defense is being used to it's drawn in a lot of supporters for Karen Read. Her attorneys argue that she is being framed, and they have an entire scenario and people they believe were involved that actually killed the victim in the case, John O'Keefe. Your thoughts on how the defense can, if they pull things together, use it effectively? It's not an uncommon thing among defense lawyers to use a third-party culprit defense.
You're so right, Molly. This week was a very technical week, but a lot of wins for the defense. And exactly to your point, they have introduced that this has all been planted by the individuals, these friends of his that were in the house. They said these law enforcement officers are the ones that have planted this evidence, and Karen Read is being falsely accused of this murder of John O'Keefe. So what they've done is that they've done a masterful job during the cross-examination of the technical experts that have come forward to testify about the collection of evidence, the collection of forensics. So what they've done, number one, and this happens a lot, quite frequently, where you have a forensic that is testing the material. In this case, it's the shards of glass, the taillight glass, and the one hair that was still on the Karen Read's car. And so what starts to happen is, well, there's other DNA that was found in these materials, not the hair, obviously, but the shards of glass. Was it tested? The defense asked her in cross-examination of the prosecutorial witness on the stand, and they had to admit to the jury they didn't test who these other individuals could be. They didn't test whether they were, that was at least the defense's position, is that there were 5 other individuals that are unidentified in their DNA's present in these materials, but yet it wasn't tested. And what ends up happening with these jurors is that there's a huge expectation. We as defense attorneys know. Juries want to know the particulars. What was the methodology that you used to look at the evidence? You have DNA, you don't know the DNA, you haven't been able to locate the individuals. Well, it would have been easy to look at these materials, these underlying evidence. And so we don't have that yet. And that's a big win for the defense for this week.
Yeah, and that trial potentially about halfway through now. Mercedes Colwin, thank you very much. Always appreciate your insights, and glad to see you this Saturday morning. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Coming up, Russia and Ukraine agreeing to a prisoner swap, but are they any closer to reaching a real peace deal? And later, what President Trump is saying about former FBI Director James Comey. Ukrainian and Russian negotiators agreed to a prisoner swap Friday in their first direct talks in more than 3 years. President Trump says that he plans to sit down with Putin as soon as possible. Steve Harrigan has all of these details from Istanbul. Steve, good morning.
Molly, certainly one big step forward that the two sides were in the same room for the first time in more than 3 years talking about peace. They did manage to agree on a prisoner swap of 1,000 prisoners on each side, but no major moves forward towards peace. That's in large part because the key players were not involved directly in these talks. No Vladimir Putin, no Zelensky from Ukraine, and of course no President Trump either, although Trump said there's probably not going to be any major progress on peace talks until he meets directly with Russian President Vladimir Putin. That sentiment echoed by the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
I think it's abundantly clear that the only way we're going to have a breakthrough here is between President Trump and President Putin.
At this point, the two sides remain very far apart. Ukraine is pushing for a 30-day ceasefire. They say if Russia does not agree to a ceasefire, they're calling for the U.S. and Europe to ramp up economic sanctions against Russia. Russia, for its part, wants complete control over 4 territories in eastern Ukraine. That includes some land that Russia does not even control after the fighting is yet. Ukraine is saying Russia's demands are, quote, divorced from reality. Molly, back to you.
All right, Steve Harrigan, thank you. So is there hope on the horizon for a peace deal? National security and military analyst Dr. Rebecca Grant joins me now. Thank you for giving us your time on this Saturday morning. I want to get your thoughts. Steve Harrigan set us up nicely there, talking about how these key leaders, Trump, Putin, Zelensky, did not attend, but they're talking. Are we getting any closer to peace for Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I was glad to see the meeting, but I got to be honest with you. This meeting was one big fat zero. The Russians walked in and said, we're happy to fight for years. And by the way, you've got to give us Kharkiv and more land. You know what Rubio really did, though, was meet with NATO and get NATO members to agree to spend maybe up to 5%. So the stage is now set for a Trump-Putin meeting. It is going to take that to get a genuine ceasefire.
And that is what the president has expressed, he believes. Marco Rubio, as the Secretary of State, has also said the same thing, that we're to have a breakthrough here until President Trump and President Putin meet in person. Do you think that meeting is close? Are we talking weeks away? It seems like the sides are somewhat expressing a willingness to get together.
Who knows? I wouldn't be surprised to see a meeting perhaps this summer. There are three big factors here. One, China still continues to support Russia. Putin likes the war. He's got his economy on a wartime footing. But here's the real one. Behind the scenes, what kind of economic and commercial incentives can the U.S. put together to try to lure Putin into a ceasefire? I think that's what Russia's envoy and our Steve Witkoff and others are really working on, is looking at some type of economic or sanctions relief that will make Putin say yes to a ceasefire.
Right, the big stick. Defense Secretary Robert Gates was on Face the Nation today, and he talked about his views on Putin's ideology. You touched on it a little bit, but he said that he believes that Putin feels that he has a destiny to recreate the Russian Empire. So is there anything that can deter that if peace is not your goal, and he has a whole other goal potentially?
Yeah, you know, Putin is just a nutcase on this subject. But I tell you this, he's had some big losses. He's lost his imperial overreach in Syria. His activities in Africa are under pressure. But as long as China is kind of giving him the blank checkbook with the energy sales, he persists in this idea. But this is exactly what's so tricky for Putin. It's all about imperial Russia, all that nonsense about NATO. So NATO has to hold very firm, as they are, to get good European security. And then there's got to be some deal that Trump has to come up with that Putin will accept. And Ukraine has to be secured. And, you know, Putin's really lost in Ukraine. That U.S. minerals deal, our security guarantees. He is never going to have the victory in Ukraine that he sought. But now we need a ceasefire and a way to get Putin down from his tree.
Yeah, well, you know, you've brought us into our next topic here. President Trump says the U.S. is very close to making a nuclear deal with Iran after delivering a proposal to that nation. The president saying, Iran wants to trade with us, okay? If you could believe that, and I'm okay with it. That's what he said to Bret Baier in this phenomenal interview earlier this week. Your thoughts on if a deal is in sight in Iran?
Yes, it's getting real, and credit the U.S. military, aircraft carriers, bombers for pointing that military power at Iran and scaring them into talking. So the deal is, as Trump says, Iran gives up the nuclear dust and gets commercial incentives in return. And I'm telling you, Iran looked at Syria getting the sanctions lifted, and boy, were they jealous. So the Ayatollahs have to take this deal proposal that's on the table, or their nuclear facilities will be targeted, whether it's limited military strikes, cyber, or whatnot. As Trump says, you can do it nice or not so nice. That military power and those options remain in place. But I think it's getting real. I think that Trump will get an Iran nuclear deal here, maybe before too long.
Yeah, a great point there about just how clear the president has been about the repercussions if they don't get to a deal and this goes in the wrong direction. One final thing, the foreign minister there in Iran pushed back on this idea that there was actually a written proposal. Do you think that's just a messaging thing that the Iranians are using?
Yes, because that same foreign minister went off and begged the Iraqis to beg the other Arab states to beg the U.S. to get sanctions lifted. They are very worried. They know that they are risking regime instability. If there is a strike on the nuclear plant, their economy is terrible. Iran is running out of room to get this deal done. We know they will never have a nuclear weapon. Got to be good inspections. It's going to be tricky, but Iran is out of time to make a good deal.
And President Trump's trip this week signaled, there are big things happening in the Middle East, and do they not want to be a part of it, I guess is the big question. Dr. Rebecca Grant, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate you and appreciate your thoughts on this Saturday morning.
Thank you.
Up next, air travel. Trouble piling up. What could it mean for your summer vacation plans? And later on, that big, beautiful, the budget bill facing some roadblocks. Can the House still get it passed by the